or we're going to hear the questions. We'll unmute.
Hello, everyone. So you are currently on mute, but you are able to unmute yourself. So if you have any questions during the Q&A or at any point, you can unmute yourself and ask the questions. And you can also chat in your questions, and we will be monitoring that.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Crush It, the 3 unbreakable laws of communication. We are going to be taking questions at the end of the presentation. So give me a few minutes to outline some concepts and some tricks and tools of delivering more persuasive presentations. And then during my presentation, I want you to think of any questions you might have of any of the concepts that I've delivered. I want you to think of perhaps examples or small case studies that you've delivered successfully that might reinforce some of the concepts. Now, I call these unbreakable laws. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to go to jail for breaking the laws, but I would argue that if you follow these guidelines, if you follow these tips and tools and techniques that are all based on the latest neuroscience, you will be far more effective at delivering your presentations. Now, I've been learning a lot about Logitech in the last few weeks. 2 weeks ago, I was on a press tour with Nalisha Chetty, as most of you probably know, senior manager there in Switzerland. And we were showing off the new presentation remote to bloggers and to media, the Spotlight that I'm using right now. I am thrilled to see that some of the headlines have really been impressive. And these are headlines, by the way. These are not sentences that are buried in the middle of a review. These are the actual headlines. A new kind of presentation remote by Computer World. An elegant tool, ZDNet. And this is my favorite. Use Logitech Spotlight to make your presentations awesome. Well, that's the point. If we now have this elegant new tool to make our presentations awesome, all of your internal presentations or outward-facing presentations need to be awesome as well, whether it's to an internal group, whether it's to sales professionals or meetings or pitches, anytime you have to sell your idea. There are 350 PowerPoint presentations delivered every second, and that's some of the Logitech statistics that we uncovered. 350. Now, I don't have to tell you, most of them are cluttered, confusing, convoluted. It doesn't have to be that way. I think there's a new gold standard in how people deliver presentations. And those are some of the books that I've written based on my passion for presentation skills. I think Steve Jobs elevated presentations to an art form. I think the TED Talks, which many of you I know view, they're streamed something like 2 million times a day, so people view them all over the world. They too have raised the gold standard when it comes to public speaking and presentations. And I just wrote a book a few months ago called The Storyteller's Secret, which is really focused on storytelling and presentation skills, and we'll talk about that as we go on. I believe that the ability to communicate your ideas persuasively is the single greatest career skill, that will help you stand apart, not only here in the company, but in the marketplace as well. Now, I'm not the only one who believes that. Listen to what billionaire Warren Buffett told a class of business students about the value he places on public speaking and delivering better presentations. He actually puts a value on the skill.
Right now, I would pay $100,000 for 10% of the future earnings of any of you. So anybody wants to see me after this is over. And, if that's true, you're $1 million asset right now, right? If 10% of it is worth 100,000, you could improve the value. Many of you, and I certainly could have when I got out, if just in terms of learning communication skills. You know, it's not something that's taught. I actually went to a Dale Carnegie course later on in terms of public speaking, but if you improve your value 50% by having better communication skills, that's, you know, it's another $500,000, you know, in terms of capital value. See me after the class and I'll pay you, you know, 150.
So according to Warren Buffett, it's an instant appreciation of more than 50% just by having better communication skills. So let's talk about what that means in your own presentations. We do have to address a multimedia generation. People are used to consuming their media in very different ways, as you know. We now communicate in story, in photos, images, Instagrams, videos, certainly, and 140 character tweets. Well, how does that apply to your next PowerPoint presentation? How are we going to engage people? There are ways of doing it. We're going to talk about 3 components that all inspiring presentations must have. They must be emotional. In other words, you have to touch somebody's heart before you use their head. Novelty. Teach me something new. Make it surprising or unexpected. And finally, we're going to go on to making presentations memorable. How do you package content in ways that I will never forget? Let's begin with emotion, touching somebody's heart before they reach their head. Very difficult to do in a PowerPoint presentation, but possible. And when it's done well, that's when you really have an engaging and memorable presentation. Well, how do you convey emotion? Well, we have to start with passion. You have to be able to inspire your audiences. I mean, what does inspiration mean? By definition, inspiration simply means eliciting an enthusiasm for your topic. Well, nobody wore passion more than Steve Jobs. In fact, Steve Jobs wore passion on his black mock turtleneck sleeve. I believe that you cannot inspire through any presentation unless you are passionate about the topic. I want you to listen to a video clip that was uploaded to YouTube only a few years ago. It was from 1997. Listen to Steve Jobs holding an internal staff meeting. This was in 97 when Apple was close to bankruptcy. Listen to the role that passion would play in revitalizing the Apple brand.
Me, marketing's about values. This is a very complicated world. It's a very noisy world. And we're not going to get a chance to get people to remember much about us. No company is. And so we have to be really clear on what we want them to know about us. Our customers want to know who is Apple and what is it that we stand for. Where do we fit in this world? And what we're about isn't making boxes for people to get their jobs done, although we do that well. We do that better than almost anybody in some cases. But Apple's about something more than that. Apple, at the core, its core value, is that we believe that people with passion can change the world for the better. That's what we believe.
I love that quote. People with passion can change the world for the better. That's what we believe. So you need to always ask yourself ahead of a presentation, what is my core value? What am I doing this for? And the secret is you're not necessarily doing it for you. You're doing it for your audience. And always be asking yourself, what is it that they're going to benefit from? How are they going to improve their lives through the product or this idea that I'm talking about right now? So always try to attach a product to an emotion. Try to attach your idea to something that's core to who you are. And it's okay to express your passion. It's okay to tell people that, hey, I'm excited about this because of what? Because of what reason? Because passion is contagious. They're studying what's called mood contagion at the University of Minnesota and a couple of other places around the world. Mood contagion simply means, and you know this intuitively, that when you meet someone who is genuinely and authentically excited about their topic, it's going to rub off on you. Amy Cuddy, a Harvard researcher, wrote a best-selling book last year called Presence. And here's what she said about that. Well, why is that? Why mood contagion? Why does it work? We tend to put our faith in people who project passion, confidence, enthusiasm, because these traits cannot easily be faked. We put our faith in people who project what? Passion. And that's why many of the great speakers and the leaders who I've interviewed, who I've talked to, who I've written about, actually use the word passion quite a bit. You'd be surprised. They use the word passion. They're very comfortable with talking about why they're passionate about something or why they're excited about something. That's the overarching fundamental concept, but how best can we convey passion? I think there's a tool, And that tool is storytelling. Ideas that catch on are wrapped in story. Stories inform, they illuminate, they inspire. A couple of years ago, I met this gentleman, Vinod Khosla, who is a billionaire venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. And he told me something interesting. He said, Carmine, it is not enough to have facts on your side. You have to do storytelling. Stories are just data with a soul, according to a famous TED speaker, Brene Brown. I'm actually speaking to you from Silicon Valley headquarters, where the Warriors play. Peter Guber is a co-owner of a famous basketball team out here, and he's really into storytelling. He has two different backgrounds in his career. One is real estate and one is Hollywood. And so he kind of blended the two together. And Peter Guber has said that purposeful storytelling is a game changer. So when he gets pitched for an idea, he wants to hear it wrapped in story. He doesn't want, like Vinod Khosla said, doesn't want to just hear the facts and figures. I need to know the story behind it. So that's interesting. And the beauty of storytelling is we actually don't have to think about it too much. It's in our DNA. Storytelling around a campfire started 400,000 years ago. Archaeologists and anthropologists say it was a major milestone in human development. Well, guess who still gathers his team around a campfire to tell stories, to share ideas? That'd be Richard Branson. Branson said that he actually commissioned a local artist to create a fire pit on his island, you know, because everyone has to have an island. And around that fire pit is where they have the team meetings, and the team meetings are led through a story. Storytelling, he says, can be used to drive change. Our brains are wired for story. A remarkable thing happens to our brain on stories. They're studying this at Princeton University. When two people are engaged in storytelling together, the two areas, the very same areas of their brains, light up. They're actually in sync. This is a screenshot from an MRI study at Princeton University. If you can see the bottom half, though that's blood flow in the brain, that is where the speaker and the listener are overlapping. They are literally having a mind meld through story. That doesn't happen if it's not story, if it's just facts or audio. It's the story, because that's the greatest way of creating an empathy between two people. Now, they call it neural coupling in the academic sciences. I just call it having a mind meld. So it's the closest thing we have of connecting two people. And that's because story, actually, I want to get into the science just a little bit. I'm just going to have 2 slides on the science behind it. It's fascinating because they actually take blood tests on people. I'm not sure if that's the kind of study I want to participate in, but they'll have people listen to stories and then take blood draws from people after they hear maybe a heartfelt story or a heartwarming story or a story of joy or sorrow, something that has a strong emotion. And what they find is that when people hear stories, they have an increased level of cortisol in their system, which forces you to pay attention. Dopamine, which makes you feel good, and we could write a whole book on dopamine. There's a reason why Hollywood movies almost always have to have a happy ending, because people want to feel good. And those that don't have a happy ending, very few are actually that successful. So there's a whole other category we can talk about there. Oxytocin, which is the empathy drug. There's a higher level of oxytocin when people hear stories. They're more likely to give money to a charity when they have a higher level of oxytocin. I mean, this stuff gets crazy. It's interesting, though. This is Paul Zak, Paul Zak is the person who actually did some of that oxytocin work. And he said, a compelling story with an emotional trigger alters our brain chemistry, making us more trusting, which is what we want from everybody, more understanding and more open to ideas. So there's different types of stories that we can talk about. I've actually, by the way, I'm going to pause right now. I've been doing this for about 10 minutes, and I know that because my timer, my vibrator on the new presentation remote just clicked off. That's one of the really neat features I love about Spotlight presentation, is that you actually have a timer, so it keeps you on track. So I won't go too long, I promise, because I've got the timer going. Okay, there's different types of stories that I want you to think about. And again, here, start taking notes. If you have any questions, we're going to come back to this. These are stories that you can weave into everyday presentations. Stories about personal experiences are going to be those stories that are going to have the most impact. I learned a lot about this from Bryan Stevenson. Now, if you do watch TED Talks, Bryan Stevenson received TED's longest standing ovation. Bryan Stevenson is a human rights attorney here in America, and he is the type of person who talks about some rather controversial things. And so he has to create empathy with his audience quite immediately. Take a look at this chart or this table. 65% of Bryan Stevenson's content falls under what Aristotle would have called pathos or emotion, storytelling. 25% data, only 10% ethos or establishing credibility. Now, I would argue that in a typical business presentation, it's completely reversed. Maybe 99% data, 1% story. But not with Bryan Stevenson. Now, what's interesting about Stevenson, I should tell you, is he knows how to persuade, which is why I need to take him seriously, because he argues and wins cases before the toughest audience in America, the U.S. Supreme Court. We've had changes in constitutional law because of some of Bryan Stevenson's work. So shouldn't we be listening to how he persuades? It's more of a balance, and I don't think in business we have a balance. It's all about the facts, figures, charts, tables, that 99% data, 1% emotion. I'm not suggesting you have 65% story, but can we reach more of a balance? Let me show you what I mean by storytelling, personal storytelling. Here's Bryan Stevenson in a now famous TED Talk giving a short story, you'll see it only lasts about a minute, about an encounter he had with his grandmother, who, when he was 11 years old, pulled him aside and asked him to make her a promise, never to drink alcohol in his life, because she didn't want him to go down the wrong path. And he said, hey, I was only 11 years old. What the heck? I agreed. Here's how he picks up the story.
I grew up in the country in the rural South, and I have a brother a year older than me and a sister a year younger. And when I was about 14 or 15, one day my brother came home and he had this six-pack of beer. I don't know where he got it. And he grabbed me and my sister, and we went out in the woods, and we were kind of just out there doing the stuff we crazily did. And he had a sip of this beer, and he gave some to my sister, and she had some, and they offered it to me. And I said, no, that's okay. Y'all go ahead. I'm not going to have any beer. And my brother said, come on, we're doing this today. You always do what we do. I had some, your sister had some, have some beer. I said, no, I don't feel right about that. Y'all go ahead. And then my brother started staring at me. He said, what's wrong with you? Have some beer. Then he looked at me real hard. He said, oh, I hope you're not still hung up on that conversation Mama had with you. I said, well, what are you talking about? He says, oh, Mama tells all the grandkids that they're special. I was devastated. And I'm going to admit something to you. I'm going to tell you something I probably shouldn't. I know this might be broadcast broadly, but I'm 52 years old, and I'm going to admit to you that I've never had a drop of alcohol. I don't say that because I think that's virtuous. I say that because there is power in identity. When we create.
Now that's what I call conversational presenting. That's a presentation, and that's a story that he tells quite often. That wasn't just off the cuff. When I asked Bryan Stevenson why he always talks about his grandmother, he said, because everybody has a grandmother. So he's trying to make instant connections with people. Some of you are familiar with Sheryl Sandberg, the COO of Facebook. She wrote a popular book and pioneered a movement called Lean In, encouraging women in the workforce. Well, it's well known now, and this is public, that her original presentations for Lean In before the book were heavy on data and no personal stories. She said that publicly. A friend of hers pulled her aside and said, wow, I know you're a data head and you love all the data about women in the workforce, women in careers, but you're not touching people emotionally. You need to open up and tell your own story. And Sheryl Sandberg said, yeah, I'm a little uncomfortable with that, but let me give it a try and see what happens. That's when it took off. That's when the presentations went viral and it turned into a book. Watch.
Now at the outset, I want to be very clear that this speech comes with no judgments. I don't have the right answer. I don't even have it for myself. I left San Francisco, where I live, on Monday, and I was getting on the plane for this conference, and my daughter, who's 3, when I dropped her off at preschool, did that whole hugging the leg, crying, "Mommy, don't get on the plane" thing. This is hard. I feel guilty sometimes. I know no women, whether they're at home or whether they're in the workforce, that don't feel that sometimes. So I'm not saying that staying in the workforce is the right thing for everyone. My talk today is about what the messages are if you do want to stay in the workforce. And I think there are 3. 1, sit at the table. 2, make your partner.
I let that roll long because we're going to talk about the power of 3 in just a moment. But you see the idea. If you're not telling stories about personal experiences, I think we're really missing an opportunity. The other story you can talk about, and this is a lot easier, case studies, stories about other people using your product. I'm going to turn to an airline here in America that's one of the most popular airlines in the world, just based on the number of people they fly, and that's Southwest Airlines. They're very good at sharing stories internally. This is more of an internal storytelling concept, but they share stories of the impact that their product, which is air travel, is having on customers. So for example, let's look at a mission statement. And what do most of us do with mission statements, by the way? We sort of look at them once and tuck them away in our desks somewhere. But here's the mission statement. We exist to connect people to what's important in their lives through friendly, reliable, and low-cost air travel. Okay, those are just words, friendly, reliable, low-cost. Hey, sounds good. Thanks for the mission statement. I'll tuck it away. They want their employees to always remember those mission statements. So every single week, they're sharing internal videos that highlight real people having a friendly, reliable, or low-cost travel experience. Here's a clip from one of those internal videos highlighting one person, one case study, and one part of the mission statement, just to reinforce what business they're in.
I am a pretty regular Southwest business traveler. It's just a different flying experience than any other airline. Everybody just is having fun with their job. They board the fastest, they get your bags off the fastest, so they're efficient, which is always great. But I knew exactly when I would land every week, and so I could easily schedule my meetings and the rest of my day around it because I knew that they were going to be on time. Leaving home was not my favorite part of the work week, but Southwest made it the best. They made it the easiest to leave and come back home to by making an enjoyable experience to come and go every week.
So that's what reliable means. Now, there are a lot of companies, and I know you folks do some of this as well, where you take those case studies or you take the videos, and when you're in sales, you're showing them to other people. So just remember that that is storytelling in a PowerPoint presentation as well. We can do that. And finally, stories about brand. I mean, Logitech and all of its divisions have wonderful stories, don't they? We have the stories about Logitech, you have stories about each division. Those are called signature stories. A signature story reflects on the brand. It's something that's intriguing or exciting or new. A signature story, according to Stanford and Berkeley professors, advances the organization's culture, mission, values, and business strategy. They are almost always, and this is important, they are almost always far more effective and impactful than communicating facts. And that's not my opinion. This is a management study conducted by business professors both at UC Berkeley and Stanford. So what do we mean by a signature story? What is a signature story versus a personal story? Remember, a signature story can be a personal story, but it reflects on the brand. That's the difference. So for example, in 1961, Fred Schultz got hurt on the job. His family had no health insurance, and they found it difficult to make ends meet. Howard, Fred's 12-year-old son at the time, vowed that if he was ever in a position to do something good for the people who he could care for, that he would. And that is why Starbucks was one of the first companies to offer full-time health benefits to part-time workers. So again, it's a story that reflects the values of that company. Now we're touching on two things. We're touching on personal story, and we're touching on signature brand stories. I love this quote from Howard Schultz. The more uninspiring your origins, the more likely you are to use your imagination and invent worlds where everything seems possible. In other words, go ahead and embrace the struggle, embrace the backstory, because those sometimes make the most compelling stories. Signature stories. Not too long ago, I was at Stag's Leap Wine Cellars, which is in Napa Valley, California. Well, in 1976, it was unheard of that a California wine could be on the same par as French wines. Almost every critic around the world said, well, that's impossible. Well, this bottle of wine changed that. This is a 1973 Cabernet Sauvignon from Stag's Leap. It won the Judgment of Paris in 1976, which was a blind tasting, which means the judges didn't know what they were tasting, and California wines were put in the same category as the French wines. The judges were so mad, they demanded that they see their scorecards. They couldn't believe it. It was impossible, they said. If it wasn't for a Time magazine reporter who was there present at the event, the world may never have known that California could make world-class wines. So it's that story that put California on the map. And today at the tasting room of this particular winery, everybody is taught how to share and how to tell that story. So again, that's a signature story. It's not really a story about one person's experience, but it reflects on the brand. What stories can I share? Don't deliver another PowerPoint presentation. I use PowerPoint because I know most of you are using PowerPoint, but whether you use Apple Keynote, Google Docs, Google Presentations, Prezi, the concept's the same. I mean, we're still using slides to tell stories. So the story has to come first. What stories can I share? And go ahead and feel free to start coming up with some questions, but we'll get to it at the end. Let's talk about novelty. And this is just a short part. Teach me something new. Package information in ways that are fresh or interesting or exciting or different. That's going to catch my attention. Our brains are trained to look for something brilliant and new, something that stands out, something that looks delicious, according to a neuroscientist in Berkeley, California. So what does that mean, to stand out, to do something brilliant and new and unexpected? Well, Bill Gates has been studying this. Bill Gates is really becoming an extraordinary communicator over the last few years. He has to communicate very complex messages. So he has been really going out of the box or out of the slide and thinking through how he's going to catch your attention by doing something surprising. In the neuroscience literature, it's called violating expectations. So you expect a PowerPoint to look and sound a certain way, and you expect slide after slide after slide, and all of a sudden Bill Gates comes along and he's doing a slideshow on how malaria is spread in third world countries, and all of a sudden he turns off the slide and he does something like this.
Things back so much. Now malaria is, of course, transmitted by mosquitoes. I brought some here so you could experience this. We'll let those roam around the auditorium a little bit. There. There's no reason only poor people should have the experience.
So what's fascinating about that is here you've got a guy who obviously is very dedicated to helping the poor, and yet he turns it into humor because he knows that's how he's going to connect with his audience. And that clip sort of stopped there, but it goes on where they start sharing more and more. And I think that's because they realize, wow, that was a fascinating way of getting us engaged in the presentation. Elon Musk at Tesla is doing this too. I mean, he's been giving marvelous presentations. Last year, he gave a presentation on a new battery. It's a home and a commercial battery that stores sunlight and converts it to energy. A couple of things. First of all, if you can see the slides, so the slides are very clean. They're very image rich, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But here is that violating expectations moment. Here's the moment where he goes off the slides and he does something so unexpected that this is what people ended up talking about. Not the slides, but what happened next. Watch.
This would be a good time to transition the power that we're using in the building to being battery powered. Of course. So let's go to the camera feed to Let's go check out the power meter. Oh wow, the grid, it's actually 0. This entire night has been powered by batteries. Not only that, the batteries were charged by the solar panels on the roof of this building. So this entire night, everything you're experiencing is stored sunlight.
I mean, come on. How can you forget that? My whole presentation, everything you've experienced at this event tonight has been powered by stored sunlight with the very products that we're going to be introducing. You're not going to forget that. Take a look at this headline from The Verge, a blog. This person, TC Sotek, was at that event. The dude is selling a battery and still managed to be inspiring. And that's the point. It doesn't really matter the type of product. I think you can be inspiring through the presentation if you follow some of these guidelines. Above all, make it novel. Your mission, Robert Ballard, by the way, you should know, was the man who discovered Titanic in 1985. So he's an explorer, but he gives these amazing presentations. And he told me once, because I interviewed him, he said, your mission in any presentation is to inform, educate, and inspire. And you can only inspire when you give people a new way of looking at their world. So think about that in your next presentation. What novel moments am I going to create? And how can I give people a new way of looking at the world? And finally, in the few minutes we have left, I want to give you some very practical tips of how to make presentations memorable, how to take content and sort of package it in a way that I'll never forget that content. The one tool that I use the most, because I think it's one of the most powerful, there's different ways of phrasing it. I call it creating a Twitter-friendly headline. That simply means asking yourself, what is the one big idea that I want to get across in my presentation? That big idea needs to be clear. It needs to be communicated at least once or twice during the presentation. There's a reason for this. There's a neuroscientific reason. Your brain craves meaning before detail. Now, I learned this from a molecular biologist by the name of John Medina, who teaches at the University of Washington. And he wrote a wonderful book called Brain Rules. But he said, Carmine, when it comes to delivering information, remember that our ancestors evolved in the savanna or in the desert, and as their brains evolved, one of the things was they had to see the big picture before details. So if primitive man ran into a tiger and saw a tiger, he wouldn't ask how many teeth does the tiger have. He would ask, will that thing eat me? Big picture before details. You don't start in the teeth. Look at those marvelous teeth. Big picture. It's very interesting. The brain needs the big picture before. It's kind of like a funnel, right? In journalism, where I started, that's what we learned, right? You need to have the headline, then the funnel. Headline, then the details. So another way of looking at it is before you create a presentation, ask yourself, what's my headline? What's the one thing that I want people to learn from this particular presentation? You can do this around any product too. If you have a new product category, or if you're just talking about a product, what is the one thing you want people to know about the product? Not 20 things, one. Let me give you an example. So this is a poorly designed slide because it's pretty boring and it's just bullet points. In 2008, Apple introduces a new computer category, the MacBook Air. Most people, I think most presenters, would have done something like this. We are really excited to introduce a thin, lightweight notebook computer, 13-inch widescreen display, backlit keyboard, Intel processor. What's the problem? The problem is details. Well, two problems. One, it's a really boring slide. Two, it's details. What's the big picture? What's so new about this category? Oh, it's the world's thinnest notebook. Now I get it, and I get it in one sentence. We're going to talk about visuals in just a minute, but what do you notice from the slide? You'll notice that The one thing, the one theme is the only word on the slide. So when you focus, when you've decided on what is the one thing I want to get across in this presentation, make sure that people can focus on that one thing, that one key idea. This is something that leaders in a lot of different industries share. I was interviewing Michael Moritz, who is the venture capitalist at Sequoia Capital. He was one of the first people to invest in Google. And he said the Google guys, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, really impressed him because they walked in and in one sentence, they can clearly articulate their vision, which was to organize the world's information and make it accessible. That's a Twitter headline. That's what we do at Google, organize the world's information and make it accessible. Michael Moritz said a great leader is able to strip things down to their essence. I interviewed Michael Moritz when he wrote a book on this other gentleman that you see on the screen, Alec Ferguson. Many of you in Europe might know him. He was the former captain or coach of, they call him the manager, I guess, of Manchester United. And he said, you know, he chimed in, he said, you know what, we had something very similar. Our headline was, at Manchester, we expect to win every game. That was the vision, and everybody knew the vision. Now, how are we going to get there? So again, it's this idea of one thing, the one thing, strip things down to their essence. Richard Branson once said, if your idea cannot be explained on the back of an envelope, it's rubbish. It's a good British term for you, right? It's rubbish. Let me tell you how to get this across in a presentation. Tim Cook introduced the Apple Watch not too long ago, a couple of years ago. When he introduced the Apple Watch, it was really interesting to me because I did not see the presentation live. I try to watch all the Apple presentations live. I didn't watch this one, but I saw the headlines on the blogs. Take a look. Apple Watch, the most personal device we've ever created. Apple Watch is the most personal device Apple's ever created. The most personal device they've ever created. Why is it that all of the headlines and the blogs were repeating the same thing? Because Tim Cook told them what to do. He highlighted it verbally. This is the one thing. This is a montage of two clips that I put together from completely different interviews. Watch.
Apple Watch is the most personal device we've ever created.
The Apple Watch is the most personal device we've ever created.
Well, the Apple Watch must be the most personal device Apple's ever created. So you see what happens if you repeat something enough. And, you know, I hesitate to, I don't want to use the word manipulation at all. That's not what I mean. But people need to frame a category. They need to frame an idea. They need to frame a product. They need help. You, as the spokesperson, should be the one to do it. So always be thinking, what is the one thing I want people to know, and what is the headline I want them to write if they were to write a headline? This is a really silly photograph of me. I'm wearing my best SanDisk red. This is the CEO, the founder of SanDisk, Eli Harari, who I worked with for several years before SanDisk was purchased for, I believe, $19 billion. Now, Eli is very important to all of us because Eli pioneered flash memory. That goes into our devices, that goes into our MP3 players and our iPods and our iPads and in our computers now and in our storage systems. He was a real pioneer of flash memory. They have hundreds of patents at SanDisk for flash memory. But I remember being in a conference with Eli. He and I were working on a particular financial presentation. And I brought this up. This was one of the first times I said, hey, let's come up with a Twitter-friendly headline. And all the engineers in the room kind of pushed back because they're a little bit more linear. You know, they want to kind of build up to the headline. I said, no, let's start with the headline. Let's see what happens. So I asked Eli, what is the one thing that nobody in that audience knows? At the time, it was flash memory was very close to that, you know, that curve. It was going to be a big shift in the growth of flash memory. But at that time, flash memory was just sort of, you know, growing slowly, sort of meandering. The hockey stick hadn't happened yet, but it was going to, according to Eli. So he said, flash memory is going to be bigger than anybody thinks. These are the slides we had. That's his first slide, his placeholder slide. Check out how plain the second slide is. Today's theme, in the coming decade, flash will be bigger than you think. That's all we did. We just put a sentence up there. And we repeated that several times in the presentation. Here's what shocked me, and here's where I learned something from, because you can always learn something new in communication. The first blog that came out by a financial analyst in the room, check out the headline. Flash will be bigger than you think. He didn't come up with that, we did. We told him what to write without telling him what to write. So again, you have to be able to ask yourself, what is the one thing that I want my audience to know? That's very powerful. And finally, support it. Support the one thing with three statistics, 3 stories, 3 anecdotes, 3 examples. 3 is a very powerful number in communication, as you could tell by this PDF that somebody once sent me, or this infographic. The rule of 3 actually pervades every aspect of our society around the globe. It's very biblical. The Bible's broken up into 3s in every book. But also, so in theology it's very big, but it's just a natural way of communicating. That's why you have the 3 Musketeers or the 3 Little Pigs, or the books are broken up into 3s. 3 is a very, very powerful number. Even in design, the new Spotlight presentation remote has only 3 buttons. Design, it's simplicity of design. So the number 3 is actually very, very simple design principle. When you have a new pitch or an idea or an email, don't give people 32 action items. Give them 3. Bundle it in 3s. 3 or 4 is what people can remember in short-term memory. Let me give you a couple of fun examples here. Let's go back to Bill Gates. Remember I was talking about how he was really thinking through communications? Well, he comes out with a newsletter every year, and in one newsletter, the title was 3 Myths That Block Progress for the Poor. 3 myths about global poverty. Here's what I noticed. Take a look at these headlines. These are real headlines from blogs. 3 big poverty myths. Bill Gates debunks 3 myths. Gates' letter challenges 3 myths. The reason why they did that is because, and this is really interesting if you talk to neuroscientists, it's almost impossible for people to ignore 3. They have to know what the 3rd is. If you tell people I've got 2 ideas or 3 action items, and you go through them, they'll look at their paper, they'll look at their notes and say, where's the 3rd? Was that the 2nd one or the 3rd one? People cannot ignore lists. So use 3. Now, sometimes if you're really brilliant, you can use 3 and create a novel moment all at the same time. And this is why I believe that the 2007 iPhone presentation, where Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone for the first time, is the single greatest business presentation I've ever seen. Rule of 3, novelty, visuals, entertainment, surprise. Watch.
We're introducing 3 revolutionary products of this class. The first one is a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The second is a revolutionary mobile phone. And the third is a breakthrough internet communications device. So, 3 things: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
Brilliant. Brilliant. That's one of the most captivating business presentations of all time. But if you break it down, he follows certain laws of unbreakable presentations. So always ask yourself, what are my 3 supporting points? And finally, if you want to make your presentations memorable, I'll get through this quickly, make data meaningful. Make it meaningful. Give it some kind of breadth or meaning. For example, when you have statistics, Steve Jobs in 2001 could have said that 5 gigabytes of storage comes in the new iPod, and nobody would have cared because nobody would have gotten any sense of context. He was smart. He's a good communicator. 5 gigabytes is the equivalent of 1,000 songs. Oh, that's more interesting. Or 1,000 songs in your pocket. Oh, now I want one. Same information, but he put it into meaning. And here's one other example that you can do. Again, this is visual and it's data. Remember, if you're going to create data and introduce a lot of data, make it visual. Not too long ago, last year, there was a story that went around the business news that K-Cups were going to go recyclable, you know, the small coffee pods. We use those in the US all the time. I think you folks use them too in Europe. And the small coffee pods are plastic. They're not recyclable. Well, a blogger wrote that there's 9 billion sold every year. 9 billion, that's still not, doesn't mean anything to me. And then the blogger said, well, 9 billion, if you stack them end to end, will circle the globe 10 times. Well, that article went viral. That number went viral and eventually forced Keurig Green Mountain to create more recyclable pods that are coming out this year. So again, it's this whole idea of people don't remember the number as much as they remember the visual that kind of goes with it. And this is the science behind it. If you deliver information verbally, people will remember about 10% of the information that you deliver. But if you add a picture or even a verbal picture, people remember 65% of the content. So make sure that when you present data, make it visual. So those are the 3. Those are the big 3 concepts that I wanted to get across in terms of your next presentation and building a storyline using some rules, techniques that will make your next presentation come alive, more interesting, engaging, and memorable. We have a few minutes left. I was wondering if anybody has any questions before I wrap up. Questions, observations, maybe you have examples from your own presentations. We're going to turn on we're going to unmute you. Mute yourselves. Sorry, we're not going to mute the whole rooms. Otherwise, we'll get feedback. Does anyone have a question that they'd like to present?
What about in Lausanne? Any questions?
So no questions in Lausanne? Anyone?
Okay.
No?
Observation.
One question in Lausanne.
Yes.
So what about body language?
I love it. Thank you. Thank you. I wasn't quite done yet. I wasn't quite done. So you just gave me the best segue. I'm going to answer your question in the next slides. Let's talk about body language, and then we'll wrap it up. In order for you to create, what I've talked about is creating a script, really creating that story. But in order to have an effortless, confident type of delivery, we do need to talk about body language. It doesn't happen behind a computer, which is why I love working with a beautiful, elegant, new presentation remote. If I'm standing behind a computer the whole time just advancing slides, that's not going to make a connection with people. I need to internalize the story first. I need to practice my presentation so I can deliver it effortlessly. And the slides simply complement my storyline. But now I got to think about how I'm going to deliver it and what I'm going to do with my hands and my gestures. It's very important. Body language is very important. They did a study that they released in the Wall Street Journal not too long ago that found that CEOs who were perceived to be more confident were actually those who had a much stronger presence, a commanding presence. Well, what does that mean? Commanding presence meant that they were not stuck behind a computer with their eyes diverted. Let me give you an example by using Spotlight, which I love this new tool. I could go crazy with this, but I have to use it with discretion. So for example, this gentleman right here rated among the lowest in this particular survey. Why? Well, because he's looking down, looking at his computer screen the whole time. That's not engaging. It's not eye contact. This woman had bad eye contact. Bad eye contact. The people who rated the highest had used their hands, their gestures. They had a smile, better eye contact. These were the men and women who were rated the highest. Here is the conclusion of this particular study. Perceptions are formed rapidly, and they're based on a wealth of nonverbal information, including gestures, movement, dynamic facial expressions, and eye gaze. A leader has to be able to command attention, to persuade, to motivate. So personal presence, just the ability to make a strong initial impression, is important. We talked about Amy Cuddy. Amy Cuddy has talked about this idea that there's certain ways of standing that convey a more confident presence. What I'm going to talk about today, just for the next couple of minutes, is what's called the power sphere. So when you are standing in particular, when you're standing like I am, or talking to a group of people, you don't want to be stuck behind a computer. You want to use what's called the power sphere, which is an area from your eyelids to the tips of your hands to your navel. This is the power sphere. This is where you want to keep your gestures. If you keep your gestures down here like this, and I'm slouching, it's very closed. It's passive. The power sphere. Take a look at the images. Steve Jobs had the power sphere going. Take a look at this little montage. The power sphere. Power sphere. Two hands, open posture, above the waist. Even when Steve Jobs in 1984 was stuck behind a lectern, he was still trying, his hands were still wanting to be free. So you have to use gestures. Don't be afraid to use gestures. They can be very powerful. I want to show you one last clip, and I'm going to use Spotlight to highlight. This is a very well-known speaker in Silicon Valley. He is the former CEO of Cisco Systems, and he is the chairman now of Cisco. Very, very successful business person around the world and very well known. He gives these dynamic presentations where he is actually in the audience. So let's watch his body language. I'm less concerned about the content here because it's a snippet taken completely out of context. Watch the body language. I'm going to try to talk through this, so I hope I don't interrupt it too much. I'll keep the volume low, maybe turned off completely. So you shouldn't be hearing the volume. Let's take a look. The body language, the power sphere. What's happening here? First of all, you see the eye contact. This is a long presentation, but he has it internalized. He doesn't have to, okay, here's the notes. He has notes, but not a lot of notes, just a few bullet points, so he knows what he's going to say next. But he's not breaking that eye contact, and the power sphere, he's keeping his gestures well within the power sphere. Two hands above the waist and making strong eye contact with his audience. So what impression does he leave you? He leaves you that impression of confidence, of competence, mostly through the body language. So I just want to end with this. Don't ever forget that you're still not selling a product. And that's, a lot of product people have a hard time kind of going from the concept of telling me about the product to tell me how the product is going to improve your life. So I like to call this selling dreams. Before every presentation, always remember that your audience, whether it's an internal audience or an external audience, they don't really care as much about your idea as much as they care about them. You know, they're pretty self-absorbed. We're all kind of self-absorbed people. Maybe getting more self-absorbed on social media. I don't know. I don't know if it's changing a little bit. But we like to think about ourselves first. And so you really have to think through, how is my product going to improve the other person's life? And if you start from that, then you start building your story, and it's going to be much more compelling, persuasive, and ultimately effective. So thank you very much. If you'd like to keep in touch with me, my name's Carmine Gallo. You can just go to carminegallo.com. We have a newsletter you can sign up and get more tips and information. That's my latest book, which is also in Europe as well. And we'd like to offer just one more thing. If you complete a 2-question survey, you'll be entered to win your own engraved spotlight, which is really cool, engraved spotlight. And that is the link. You can either copy and paste that link, or you can go to your calendar. It's a real simple 2-question survey. So thank you very much for attending this webinar today, and I hope you enjoyed it. Now go out and crush your next presentation. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.